He was 18 years old, homeless, and on his way to a house he'd never seen, a place left to him by a man he'd never met. What he found there wasn't just a roof over his head. It was a secret that would unravel his entire life. If you've ever felt like you were starting over with nothing but a key and a question mark, then you know where this story begins. Make sure you subscribe, because we're going to get through this together. The clock on the bus station wall clicked over to 3:17 a.m., and with that, I was officially an adult. 18. The word felt hollow, like a cheap chocolate Easter bunny. It looked good from the outside, but one tap and the whole thing would collapse. For 2 years, since my last foster placement disintegrated, I'd lived in a group home that smelled of bleach and quiet desperation. 2 years of counting down the days to my 18th birthday, imagining it as some kind of liberation, freedom. Now that it was here, it just felt like a different kind of cage, one without walls, but just as confining. My worldly possessions were in a single black duffel bag at my feet. In my pocket, I had $84 and a single, old-fashioned brass key, heavy and ornate, its teeth worn smooth with time. The bus groaned into the bay, its brakes hissing like a tired dragon. It was the last one out of the city, heading north into the dark, rural heart of the state, where towns were just names on a map, punctuation marks in long, empty sentences of highway. I was the only one to get on. The driver, a man with a face like a worn-out road map, glanced at my ticket, then at my face, then at my duffel bag. His eyes held a flicker of something, pity maybe, or just professional indifference. He didn't say a word, just jerked his head toward the empty seats behind him. I found a spot by a window, the glass cold and streaked with the grime of 1,000 miles. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I watched the city lights smear into a watercolor blur, then vanish completely. I didn't look back. There was nothing there to look back on, just a series of doors that had closed, one by one, for as long as I could remember. This key in my pocket, it was supposed to open a new one. I wasn't sure I believed it. Ms. Albright had given it to me 2 days earlier, in her state-issued office that was the exact shade of beige I imagined souls turned when they gave up. She was my final caseworker, a woman who tried to hide her exhaustion behind a professional, placid smile, but it never quite reached her eyes. Her desk was a fortress of manila folders, each one a life like mine, distilled down to paperwork and problems. She'd slid a thick, legal-looking envelope across the desk. "Leo," she'd said, her voice gentle but firm, the same tone she probably used for every lost kid who sat in that chair. "As you know, upon your 18th birthday, you officially age out of state custody." I nodded. I knew. I had been dreading and dreaming of this day in equal measure. "Normally," she continued, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the envelope, "we would transition you to a shelter or a transitional housing program. However, a unique situation has arisen." She explained it in that careful, bureaucratic language. A great-uncle I never knew existed, Silas Miller, had passed away nearly a year ago. He had no other living relatives. In a will scrawled on a single piece of notebook paper, a will that had taken the state's lawyers months to verify, he had left his entire estate to me. His estate consisted of a small farmhouse and 10 acres of land in a place called Havenwood. The name sounded like a lie. "There are complications," Ms. Albright had warned, her smile finally faltering. "The property has significant back taxes owed, several years' worth. And there's an outstanding offer from a development company, a very generous one, to purchase the land. The state has been managing the correspondence. They want to clear the parcel for a new distribution center. She slid another paper toward me. It was a formal offer from a company called Omnicorp Logistics. The number made my head spin. It was more money than I had ever imagined seeing in one place. Enough to get a real apartment, a car, to disappear and start over somewhere new, somewhere warm. The offer would more than cover the back taxes, she said, her meaning clear. It was the easy way out, the sensible way out. You could sell, pay the debt, and have a substantial amount left over to build a new life. I looked at the number, then at the key she placed on top of the envelope. It didn't look like a key to a fortune. It looked like a key to a haunted house in a storybook. Or, she said, her voice dropping slightly, you could choose to keep it. Try to pay the taxes yourself. But Leo, you need to understand, if you can't pay them within 90 days, the county will seize the property and auction it off. You'd lose everything and end up with nothing. The choice was simple. Take the money and run, or take a chance on a broken-down house that was already halfway to being repossessed. A ghost of a home left by a ghost of a relative. Why me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I never even met him. Ms. Albright sighed, a genuine, tired sound this time. His will was very specific. It just said, for my sister's boy, Leo. He'll know what to do with it. That's you. Your mother was his only niece. My mother, another ghost. I had a few faded photographs and a box of memories that weren't my own. Stories told to me by strangers in a system that had become my only family. She had died when I was 5. I never knew why or how, just that one day she was there, and the next she wasn't. The bus rattled on, its headlights cutting a lonely path through the oppressive darkness. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass, the vibration humming through my skull. What was I supposed to do with it? A falling-down farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't a home. It was a problem, a test, and I had a long history of failing tests. The money from Omnicorp was a clean slate, a ticket to anonymity. But the key felt different. It was a connection, a single tenuous thread stretching back to a life before the system, to a family I never got to know. Taking the money felt like cutting that thread. It felt like an admission that I was, and always would be, completely alone. For the first time in a long time, I realized I had a real choice. Not a choice between two bad options, like which group home to be sent to, but a choice that would define who I was going to be. The scared kid who took the easy money, or the fool who took a chance on a ghost's last wish. The bus slowed, pulling over to the side of a deserted 2-lane road. Havenwood, the driver grunted, not even turning around. This is you. I grabbed my duffel bag and stepped out into the night. The air was shockingly cold and clean, smelling of damp earth, pine needles, and something wild I couldn't name. The bus pulled away, its red tail lights shrinking into the darkness, leaving me in a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. There was no station, no building, not even a streetlight, just a gravel shoulder and a weathered wooden sign that read, Havenwood, Pop, 214. Across the road, a dirt lane disappeared into a thick stand of trees. That had to be it. According to the hand-drawn map Ms. Albright had given me, the farm was at the end of that lane, about a 2-mile walk. I pulled the collar of my Finn jacket up against the wind, shifted the weight of the bag on my shoulder, and started walking. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, and the darkness was absolute. My footsteps on the gravel sounded impossibly loud. Every rustle in the woods, every snap of a twig made me jump. I felt like an intruder, a city kid who had wandered into a world that didn't want him. The $84 in my pocket suddenly felt like nothing. The key, however, felt heavier than ever. The lane was longer than I thought, twisting and turning through the woods. It was less a road and more of a suggestion, two muddy ruts carved into the earth. My cheap sneakers were soaked through in minutes. The cold was a living thing, seeping into my bones, making my teeth chatter. I kept walking, focusing on the simple rhythm of my feet hitting the ground. Left, right, left, right. It was the same rhythm that had gotten me through 16 years of uncertainty. Just keep moving. Don't think about where you're going, just think about the next step. After what felt like an hour, the trees began to thin. The lane opened up into a clearing, and there it was, the house. Even in the gloom, I could see it was in bad shape. It was a classic two-story farmhouse, the kind you see in sad paintings, with a wide, sagging porch and windows like vacant eyes. The white paint had peeled away in long strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. The roof was patched in a dozen places with mismatched shingles. To the left stood a large barn, its great doors hanging crookedly on their hinges, one of them threatening to fall off completely. The whole place seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the next strong wind to finally give up and collapse. I stood there for a long time, just looking at it. This was my inheritance, a ruin, a monument to decay. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, turning into a plume of white vapor in the frigid air. Ms. Albright had called it a unique situation. That was one word for it. I walked up the 3 creaking steps to the porch, my feet crunching on fallen leaves and debris. The front door was a solid slab of oak, scarred and weathered, but still strong. The brass doorknob was tarnished green, but the keyhole looked clean, as if waiting. My hand was shaking as I pulled the key from my pocket. It felt like a ritual, a moment of passage. I slid the key into the lock. It was stiff at first, but with a bit of pressure, it turned with a loud, satisfying clunk that echoed in the silent night. I pushed the door open. It swung inward on groaning hinges, revealing a darkness that was even deeper than the night outside. The air that rolled out was stale and cold, thick with the smell of dust, damp wood, and forgotten time. I took a deep breath, slung my duffel bag over my shoulder, and stepped across the threshold. I was home. The inside was a time capsule. Everything was covered in a thick, uniform layer of gray dust, softening the edges of the furniture and muting all the colors. It was like walking into a photograph from 100 years ago. In the faint moonlight filtering through the grimy windows, I could make out the shapes of a living room. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth filled with ancient ashes. A sofa and 2 armchairs, draped in white sheets, looked like ghostly figures in the gloom. A grandfather clock stood silent in the corner, its hands frozen at 4:30. I ran a hand along the dusty mantelpiece, my fingers leaving a clean streak. It felt profoundly wrong to be here, to be disturbing this long, quiet sleep. But it was my house now, my problem. I dropped my duffel bag by the door. The thud was swallowed by the oppressive silence. First things first, I needed light and warmth. I fumbled in my bag for the small flashlight Ms. Albright had insisted I take. Its beam cut a sharp cone through the darkness, illuminating swirling dust motes. I did a quick sweep of the ground floor. A dining room with a heavy oak table and chairs, A kitchen with a massive cast-iron stove and a hand-pump sink, and a small room at the back that might have been a study or a bedroom. Every surface was coated in that same fine dust. Every drawer I tried to open was empty. It was as if someone had packed up all the personal belongings, leaving only the heavy furniture behind. I went back to the living room and turned my attention to the fireplace. If I could get a fire going, it would change everything. It would push back the cold and the darkness. It would make this place feel less like a tomb and more like a shelter. I found a stack of old dry newspapers in a wooden box next to the hearth, and a pile of firewood that looked as ancient as everything else, but felt solid and dry. I crumpled the newspaper, stacked the kindling, and laid a few larger logs on top. It took me 3 tries with my cheap lighter, my fingers numb and clumsy with cold, but finally a small flame caught. It wavered, threatened to die, then grew, licking at the kindling with a hungry crackle. I sat on the floor in front of it, feeding it small pieces of wood, mesmerized by the growing light. The flames danced, casting huge, flickering shadows on the walls, making the shrouded furniture seem to move. For the first time all day, a fragile warmth began to seep into my skin. I wasn't just a trespasser anymore. I was making my mark, however small. I was bringing a tiny spark of life back to this forgotten place. As the fire grew stronger, I felt some of the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. Maybe, just maybe, I could do this. It was just a house. It was cold and empty, but it was mine. I spent the next hour exploring more thoroughly. The kitchen pump, to my astonishment, still worked. After a few minutes of vigorous pumping, a stream of rusty, sputtering water came out, which eventually ran clear and tasted clean and ice-cold. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. In a pantry off the kitchen, I found a few sealed tins of what looked like beans and a jar of something unidentifiable. Not much, but it was more than I had. Upstairs there were 2 bedrooms, both as dusty and empty as the rooms below. The beds were stripped down to the bare mattresses, the closets vacant. It was in the 2nd bedroom, the one at the back of the house overlooking the skeletal trees of the orchard, that I found it. On a small bedside table, untouched by the dust that covered everything else, sat a heavy, dark wood box. It wasn't locked. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was different. This felt intentional. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a stack of envelopes, tied together with a piece of twine. The letters were addressed to me. For Leo, the top one read, in a spidery, elegant handwriting. I took the box back downstairs and sat by the fire, its warmth now filling the room. The shadows had retreated to the corners. I untied the twine and picked up the first envelope. It felt heavy, important. My hands were trembling slightly as I opened it. The letter inside was written on thick, creamy paper. The date at the top was from almost a year ago, just before my great-uncle Silas must have passed away. I began to read. "Dear Leo," it started, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the state has finally seen fit to find you. I am sorry we never had the chance to meet. My name is Silas Miller, and your grandmother was my sister. I am told you have your mother's eyes. I hope so. They were kind eyes." I had to stop and take a breath. The directness of it, the simple, personal words, hit me harder than any legal document or caseworker's speech. This was real. This was family. I continued reading. "I have left you this place. I know it isn't much to look at right now, but it is good land, and this house has strong bones. It has been in our family for over 100 years. It is your birthright. I know you have not had an easy life. I know more than you think. Your mother, my niece, she wrote to me often. She was so proud of you. She loved you more than anything in this world, Leo. Never doubt that. The words blurred. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, angry at the sudden sting of tears. Love was a foreign word to me, something I read about in books, not something that had ever been directed at me. The letter went on to explain why he'd left me the farm. He wrote about the family, about the land, about a life I couldn't even imagine. He said he knew I would be given a choice, to sell the land to the corporation that had been circling for years, or to keep it. The money will be a temptation, he wrote, a quick fix. But this place, Leo, this is a foundation. Money runs out. Land remains. The choice, of course, must be yours. I cannot make it for you. But I want you to know the truth before you decide. The truth. What truth? What did he mean? The letter ended with a cryptic instruction. There is more you need to know. More I need to tell you. Look for the second letter where the North Star shines brightest in winter. What did that even mean? I read the line over and over. Where the North Star shines brightest in winter. It sounded like a riddle from a fantasy novel. I folded the letter and put it back in the box, my mind reeling. My mother loved me. A great uncle I'd never met had left me his home, his legacy. And there was a secret, a truth he wanted me to find. The fire crackled, spitting a shower of sparks onto the hearth. The house was still cold, still empty, but it didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a puzzle. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was purpose. I fell asleep on the floor in front of the dying fire, wrapped in the one thin blanket from my duffel bag. My sleep was dreamless and heavy, the kind of exhausted sleep that offers no rest. I was woken up by a sound. It was faint at first, a rhythmic creaking from directly above me. I lay perfectly still, my eyes wide open in the pre-dawn gloom, every nerve ending on high alert. The fire was nothing but a bed of glowing orange embers, casting a weak, pulsing light. Creak, pause, creak. It was the sound of floorboards, the sound of footsteps. Someone was walking in the loft above the living room. My blood went cold. I wasn't alone. Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind. I was an idiot, a stupid city kid who had walked into a trap. Of course the house wasn't empty. It was probably some squatter, some dangerous transient who had been living here, and I had just walked in and made myself at home in his space. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth across the length of the room above. A floorboard groaned under a heavy weight. I thought about the flashlight in my bag, the small pocket knife I kept zipped in an inner compartment. Neither would be much use against a grown man. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself up into a sitting position. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The floorboards above me went silent. Had he heard me? Was he listening, just as I was? The silence was somehow worse than the sound. It was thick with anticipation, with threat. I stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity, straining my ears for any noise. Nothing. Just the faint whisper of the wind outside and the frantic pounding of my own blood. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and wait. I crawled silently over to my duffel bag and fumbled for my flashlight. My fingers closed around its cool metal casing. I clicked it on, the beam of light seeming impossibly bright in the darkness. I swept it across the room, at the shrouded furniture, the dark corners, the doorway. Nothing. Then I pointed it at the ceiling. I could see the rough-hewn wooden planks, the gaps between them filled with shadows. The loft. I hadn't even noticed the access panel before. It was a simple square cut into the ceiling in the far corner, with a small metal ring for a handle. It was closed. The footsteps started again. This time they sounded different, less like pacing and more like searching. There was a dragging sound, the scrape of something heavy being moved across the floor. Then a distinct thud. Silence again. My mind was racing. Who was up there? What were they looking for? And what would they do if they found me? The offer from Omnicorp flashed in my mind. The easy money, the clean getaway. I could be on a bus right now, heading south, away from this cold, creepy house and whoever was hiding in its attic. But then I thought of Silas's letter. I want you to know the truth. Was this part of it? Was the secret he mentioned hiding up there in the dark? I had a choice to make, right here, right now. I could grab my bag and run, disappear back into the anonymity of the system, another lost kid who couldn't handle the real world. Or I could stay. I could face whatever was up there. I could demand answers. The fire in the hearth was almost dead, just a handful of glowing coals. It was my choice. Let the last spark of this new life die out, or find the courage to fan it back into a flame. I took a deep, shuddering breath, grabbed the heaviest piece of firewood I could find, and stood up. I was done with running. Holding the flashlight in one hand and the log in the other, I moved toward the corner of the room, directly under the loft hatch. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. It came out as a weak, reedy sound, immediately swallowed by the vast emptiness of the house. "Is someone up there?" The only answer was silence. The footsteps had stopped again. I stood there, my arm aching from the weight of the log, my knuckles white. "I know you're up there," I said, trying to inject a confidence I didn't feel. "This is my house. You need to come out." Nothing. It was like talking to a ghost. Maybe that's all it was. The settling of an old house, the wind, my own frayed nerves playing tricks on me. But the sound had been so clear, so distinct. The weight on the floorboards. It had felt real. I had to know. I dragged one of the heavy dining room chairs across the floor, the sound of its legs scraping against the wood impossibly loud. I positioned it under the hatch. I climbed onto the chair, my legs unsteady. Reaching up, my fingers brushed against the cold metal ring. I hesitated for a second, then pulled. The hatch swung down with a groan, releasing a cascade of dust and the smell of old paper and cedar. A simple, retractable wooden ladder was attached to it. It unfolded with a series of clacks, its final step coming to rest a few inches from the floor. The loft was open. A square of absolute blackness yawned above me. I stood on the chair, peering up into the darkness. My flashlight beam cut into it, revealing a space that was much larger than I expected. The roof peaked high above, with massive beams crisscrossing the space like the ribs of a whale. The floor was cluttered with old furniture, wooden crates, and stacks of canvas-covered objects. It was a sea of forgotten things, a family's entire history packed away and left to the spiders and the dust. I swept the light from one end of the loft to the other. There was no one there. It was empty. I felt a wave of relief so intense it made me dizzy, followed by a surge of confusion. I had heard it. I knew I had. I hadn't imagined it. I climbed the ladder, the old wood creaking under my weight. Stepping into the loft was like stepping into another time. The air was still and thick. My flashlight beam danced across the landscape of clutter. A child's rocking horse, a dressmaker's dummy, stacks of old books tied with string. And in the center of the room, a heavy wooden trunk, its lid slightly ajar. Next to it, a clear patch on the dusty floor, with scuff marks, as if something heavy had recently been dragged there. The sound I had heard. I approached the trunk, my heart starting to pound again. This was it. This had to be it. I knelt down and pushed the lid all the way open. Inside, it was filled with more letters, old photographs, and legal documents. But on top of it all was a shoebox. It was newer than everything else in the loft, a simple cardboard box. I picked it up. It was heavy. I opened the lid. I couldn't breathe. The box was filled with money, stacks of cash, bundled together with rubber bands, 10s, 20s, 50s. I reached in and pulled out a stack. It felt unreal, like play money. I had no idea how much was there, but it was a lot. More than the offer from Omnicorp. Tucked into the side of the box was another envelope with my name on it. This one was sealed. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely open it. It was another letter from Silas. "Leo," it began, "if you found this, it means you were brave enough to face the ghosts. I am proud of you. The footsteps you heard, well, an old house makes noises, and a guilty conscience can make a man imagine things. Or perhaps it was just me, checking in on you." A small, dry smile touched my lips. A gentle bit of humor from beyond the grave. "This money," the letter continued, "is for the back taxes. It should be more than enough. I saved it for years, a little at a time. I couldn't trust the banks, and I couldn't put it in the will, or the state would have taken it to pay for your care. This was the only way I could make sure it got to you directly. This money buys you a real choice, Leo. Not the false choice between selling out and foreclosure. This money levels the playing field. You can pay the taxes, and the house, the land. It will be yours, free and clear. Omnicorp will not be able to bully you. But it also means you have no more excuses. The easy way out is gone. Now you have to decide what kind of man you want to be. Do you want to be the man who takes a payoff, or the man who builds a home?" He was right. The money didn't make the choice easier. It made it harder. It made it real. Before, keeping the farm was a fantasy, a romantic but impossible dream. Now, it was a genuine possibility, a difficult, daunting, terrifying possibility. I would be alone, in the middle of nowhere, with a crumbling house and 10 acres of neglected land. It would be hard work. It would be lonely. But it would be mine. The letter wasn't finished. "There is one more thing you need to know," it said. "The most important thing. It is the real reason I had to make sure you got this place. It's about your mother. It's about why she had to leave you." My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The truth. "Go to the barn. Look for the loose stone in the foundation of the old milking stall, the one closest to the east wall. You will find the rest of the story there. Forgive me for making you work for it, boy. Some truths are too heavy to be handed over all at once. You needed to prove you were ready for this one. I believe you are now. Your great-uncle, Silas." I sat there in the dusty loft, the box of money in my lap, the letter in my hand, surrounded by the ghosts of my ancestors. The sun was beginning to rise, casting long, pale fingers of light through the single dirty window at the far end of the loft. The footsteps were explained. The riddle of the first letter was solved. He must have meant the loft window, which faced north. And a new path was laid out before me, leading to the barn and the final piece of the puzzle. I had the money to save the farm. Now I just needed to find out if it was a farm worth saving. I needed to know the truth about the woman who gave birth to me. Have you ever been at a crossroads like that? A moment where a single choice will change the entire trajectory of your life. It's terrifying, isn't it? To have that much power, that much responsibility, especially when you feel like you have nothing. If you've ever had to make a choice that scared you to your core, let me know in the comments. I read every one, and I want you to know this community is a place where those stories are honored. You are not alone in facing those big, life-altering decisions. Now, let's get back to the story. I had a barn to get to. I carefully packed the money back into the shoebox, placed it in the wooden trunk, and closed the lid. It felt safer there, hidden among the past. I climbed down the ladder, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The fear was gone, replaced by a thrumming, nervous energy. I left the house through the back door in the kitchen, stepping out into the crisp morning air. The sun was just cresting the horizon, painting the underside of the clouds in shades of pink and orange. The world felt new, washed clean. The frost on the overgrown grass glittered like a carpet of diamonds. The barn was even bigger up close than it had looked from the house. It was a cathedral of decay. Its red paint faded to a soft, mottled pink, its roofline sagging in the middle like an old man's back. The one great door that was still on its hinges was swollen shut. I had to put my shoulder into it, pushing with all my weight until it scraped open with a tortured groan, revealing the cavernous, dark interior. The barn smelled of hay, dust, and time. Huge beams of light lanced down from holes in the roof, illuminating swirling dust motes like tiny galaxies. To my left were a series of stalls. The milking stall, Silas had said, the one closest to the east wall. I walked down the central aisle, my boots echoing on the packed dirt floor. I found the stall easily. It was smaller than the others, with a low wooden partition. I ran my hands along the stone foundation at the back. The stones were large and rough-hewn, fitted together with crumbling mortar. I pushed against each one, looking for any sign of movement. Finally, my fingers found it. One of the stones, near the floor, shifted slightly under my touch. My heart leaped. I dug my fingers into the cracks around it, pulling and wiggling until it came loose. Behind it was a small, dark cavity. Reaching inside, my fingers brushed against a metal box. I pulled it out. It was an old, rusted ammunition box, heavy and solid. The latch was stiff, but I managed to pry it open. Inside, protected by an oilcloth wrap, was one last, thick envelope. This was it, the end of the story. I didn't read it there. I took the box back to the house, stoked the fire back to life, and sat on the floor, the same spot where I had cowered in fear only hours before. I took a deep breath and opened the final letter. The handwriting was the same, but it seemed more urgent, less steady. "Leo," it began, "I pray you never have to read this. I pray that you sell the farm, take the money, and go live a long, happy life somewhere far away from here. But if you have come this far, you are stubborn, like your mother, and you deserve the whole truth. It is a heavy one. I have carried it for 13 years. Now, I pass it to you." I read on, my world shrinking to the words on the page. Silas explained that my mother, Elena, had fallen in with a dangerous man when I was a toddler. My father. He wasn't just a bad guy. He was involved in organized crime. He used people, hurt them, and my mother had become trapped. She tried to leave him, but he wouldn't let her. He threatened her, threatened me. She was terrified. She wrote to Silas in secret, desperate for a way out. "She showed up here one night," Silas wrote, "in the middle of a thunderstorm. You were asleep in the back of her car. She had a black eye and a split lip. Her face was a mask of terror. She told me everything. He was looking for her. She knew he would never stop. She couldn't protect you both. So she made a choice. The hardest choice a mother can make. The words on the page began to swim. I could almost hear his voice, a low, gravelly whisper in the quiet room. She asked me to help her disappear. We staged an accident, a car crash, a fire. The police found a body, burned beyond recognition. It was all arranged. It cost her everything she had, but it bought your safety. The story was that she died, and you, her orphan son, were taken in by the state. It was the only way to sever the connection, to make your father believe you were both gone. She couldn't take you with her. To be on the run with a child was impossible. He would have found you. So she left you. Not because she didn't love you, Leo. She left you because she loved you more than her own life. I was sobbing now, raw, guttural sobs that tore through my body. All those years in foster homes, feeling abandoned, unwanted, thrown away. I had spent my entire life believing my mother hadn't wanted me. I had built my whole identity on that single, painful fact. And it had all been a lie. It wasn't abandonment. It was a rescue. It was a sacrifice. The letter contained more. Inside the envelope were documents. A new identity for my mother. A driver's license with a different name. A social security card. And a photograph. A woman with kind eyes, my eyes, smiling. A picture taken somewhere sunny and warm. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, it said, "My Leo, be strong. I love you always." There was also a thick file of papers. They were copies of documents, ledgers, and sworn statements my mother had collected, evidence against my father and his criminal network. She gave these to me for safekeeping, Silas's letter concluded. She wanted to make sure that if anything ever happened to her, the truth would come out, and he would pay for what he did. This farm, this land, it's not just a home, Leo. It's a vault. It's the last safe place. Your father is a powerful man. He has since been arrested, but his organization is still active, and they have long memories. The development company, Omnicorp, it's a shell corporation, a way for them to launder money and control territory. They don't just want this land, they need it. They've been trying to buy it for years, to bury the past. They don't know this evidence is here. They just know this farm belonged to the family of the woman who got away. They want to erase it. Now you have the evidence to stop them for good. You can take it to the authorities. It will be dangerous. They will come after you. Or you can burn it, sell the land, and run. No one would blame you. Your mother wanted you to be safe, but she also wanted you to be strong. The choice, as always, is yours. I sat there for hours, the fire burning down to embers for a second time, the sun climbing high in the sky. The letters, the documents, the photograph, they were spread out on the floor around me like the pieces of a shattered life. My life. Everything I thought I knew was gone. I wasn't an orphan. I was the son of a woman who had performed an act of impossible love. I wasn't just some kid who had inherited a worthless farm. I was the guardian of a legacy, the keeper of a truth that could bring down powerful, dangerous people. I cried for the little boy who felt so alone. I cried for the mother I never knew, for the life she had been forced to live. And I cried for the old man who had watched over me from a distance, who had protected her secret, and who had trusted me, a complete stranger, to do the right thing. The weight of it all was crushing, The fear was real. These were not faceless systems anymore. They were criminals. People who had hurt my mother. People who would not hesitate to hurt me. I walked over to the window and looked out at the land. The neglected orchard, the overgrown fields, the stoic, crumbling barn. It looked different now. It wasn't a ruin. It was a fortress. It was a sanctuary. It was the only real home I had ever had. And these people, this corporation, they wanted to tear it down, to pave it over, to erase the last trace of my family from the earth. My choice was already made. It had been made the moment I decided to walk up that dark lane, the moment I decided to face the noises in the loft, the moment I decided to open that first letter. I couldn't run, not anymore. To run would be to betray my mother's sacrifice, to dishonor Silas's faith in me. I spent the rest of the day making a plan. I gathered all the documents, all the evidence. I put the money for the taxes in a separate, secure place. The next morning, I walked the 2 miles back to the main road. I caught a local bus to the next town over, the county seat. I walked into the county clerk's office, my heart pounding, and paid the back taxes in cash. The woman behind the counter looked at the stacks of bills, then at me, her eyebrows raised, but she just stamped the papers. "The property is officially yours, Mr. Miller," she said, "free and clear." It was the first time anyone had ever called me Mr. Miller. From there, I went to the state police barracks. I asked to speak to a detective in the organized crime unit. I sat in a small, sterile interrogation room for an hour before a tired-looking man in a rumpled suit came in. He introduced himself as Detective Riley. He looked skeptical. He had probably seen 1,000 kids like me, with wild stories and nothing to back them up. I didn't say much. I just opened my duffel bag and laid the ammunition box on the table between us. I opened the lid and pushed the file of evidence toward him. "This belonged to my mother," I said, my voice steady. "I think it's something you'll want to see." He started to read. I watched his expression change, from boredom to curiosity, then to shock, and finally to a grim, focused intensity. He read for nearly an hour, occasionally looking up at me as if seeing me for the first time. When he was done, he closed the file and looked me straight in the eye. "You have any idea what you've been sitting on, kid?" he asked, his voice low. "This is the missing piece. We've been trying to build a case against this network for years. This connects all the dots." The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, police interviews, and witness protection protocols. Omnicorp's offer was rescinded. Their assets were frozen. Arrests were made. It was all over the news, a huge story about a local development company being a front for a criminal enterprise. My name was never mentioned. I was just the anonymous source who had broken the case wide open. I finally went back to the farm. It was strange. The world had changed, but the farm was exactly the same. The sagging porch, the peeling paint, the quiet, waiting silence. But it felt different to me. I wasn't a guest anymore. I wasn't a squatter. I was the owner. I was home. The work was hard. I started by just cleaning. I swept away the years of dust, washed the windows until the sunlight streamed in, and aired out the stale, musty smell. I repaired the broken step on the porch. I cleared the weeds from the front yard. Each small act of repair felt like I was healing a piece of myself. I learned to chop wood, to patch a roof, to live with the rhythm of the sun and the seasons. I was lonely, but it wasn't the desperate, aching loneliness of the group home. It was a peaceful solitude. I had the ghosts of my family for company. I would talk to Silas sometimes, out in the barn. I'd tell him about my day, about the progress I was making. And I'd talk to my mother. I kept her picture on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. I told her I understood. I told her I was proud of her. One day, a car pulled up the lane. It was Detective Riley. He had a box for me. It was from the evidence locker. It contained a few of my mother's personal effects, things found in a storage unit she had kept under her new name. A few books, some clothes, and a journal. The last entry was dated the day before she left me with Silas. "I'm leaving my boy tomorrow," she wrote. "My heart is breaking into a million pieces, but I know this is the only way to give him a chance at a real life. I pray he grows up to be a good man. I pray he will be strong and kind. And I pray that one day, somehow, he will know that every beat of my broken heart belongs to him." I closed the journal, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. My life was no longer a question mark. It was a story, a difficult, painful, beautiful story. It was a story of sacrifice, of love, and of a home that had waited for me my whole life. Standing on the porch of that old farmhouse, looking out over the land that was now mine, I knew what Silas meant when he said I would know what to do with it. This place wasn't just a house, it was a foundation, and I was finally ready to build on it. This whole experience taught me that home isn't just four walls and a roof. It's a feeling of belonging. It's a connection to a story that's bigger than you are. It's the place where you finally understand who you are meant to be. For me, that place was a rundown farmhouse I inherited from a ghost. It saved my life. So, what about you? What does home mean to you? Share your story in the comments below. I truly believe that by sharing our stories, we help each other heal and build our own foundations. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you feel something,